Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we're here to talk about the cognitive function stack of the ISFJ and the ISTJ and the two variations that are presented in both of these types. So, through Dario Nardi's assessment, CPA, otherwise known as keys to cognition, and other cognitive function test creators, they've come to the same understanding that from the results of their assessment, there are two main patterns that you'll find with the types. Dario is here to share the results of what he's learned through his cognitive assessment tool. I'll have you share what your thoughts and yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And thank you for mentioning the CPA because that's where the data is coming from. These are not just ideas generated from some theory or conjecture. This is analyzing results over, gosh, almost 20 years, but over 200,000 people for everybody, since we're talking about introverted sensing today, all of the people who rated introverted sensing highest. And I want to emphasize the CPA is not like a Myers-Briggs assessment. It doesn't give like opposites to choose from. It just presents statements that people rate on a scale individually. So you end up getting a sort of bar chart of the eight Jungian functions. And for those who had introverted sensing as strongest, what do we notice? We notice the same thing that we've noticed with the other ones we've talked about, that there are these like statistical clusters. So among the folks with strong SI, the strongest, that there are 4 clusters, and 2 of them are quite clearly ISTJs. One of them is very clearly an ISFJ, and then the other one it looks like an ISFJ who masquerades as an ISTJ. I say that we'll dig into it and see it, and we're going to see that a little bit more as we go with some other types in the future, with ENFPs, for example, also can masquerade with extroverted thinking pretty well. So that's the really like tens of thousands of people we're talking about, all consistently rating the functions for themselves. And when you say rating, we're asking them not about their deep preference, which they might not know, but their skillful use. So that represents the effect of career and culture and childhood and all of that in a world that strongly supports introverted sensing, extroverted thinking, and extroverted feeling. So, and especially in a business world and a work world, is generally speaking, it's going to be introverted sensing and extroverted thinking, which has a big effect on ISFJs. And as we'll see later, for ESFJs as well. Oh, and I should mention, so I've been meaning to do this with all of them, and I know some of them I haven't explicitly talked about it, but you may be wondering as an audience member, okay, you say introverted sensing, but what is that actually? Like, how am I defining that? And how did that come out in the assessment? So of the different questions, there were 3, for each function, there were 3, we picked out the 3 top performing questions. That are most statistically correlated as forming like a cluster that's a unique, like introverted sensing cluster. And so there are 3 things that stand out. Noticing whether the details in front of you match what you were accustomed to. So there's this like referencing the past and then making a comparison. The second thing is comparing an experience, a whole experience, against a storehouse of familiar experiences to find what's reliable. This is the same idea, except on the level of experiences rather than just details. And then to support this, or support these 2, reviewing a lot of information over time to confirm what is customary or standard. So those are the things that I'm using, and those are the things people rated really high on all 3 of those things. So for people who rate those high, plus feeling or thinking, whatnot, like what kind of stacks do we see? What kind of skills do people develop?
Yeah, so you're not gauging deep preference, you're gauging skillful usage in the CPA. So most people have actually taken it, they just didn't know it was the CPA because they know it by the colloquial name, which is keys to cognition. So
Mhm.
I didn't know like that it had a formal name too until you started mentioning it. And so I'm curious to learn a little bit about the two variations of ISFJ Could you share a little bit about that?
Sure. So generally speaking, we've been noticing in these variations for each dominant function, we're seeing like, okay, among like NI types, there's clearly two that are INFJs and two that are INTJs based just upon the overall pattern. It's the same thing we see here. And then I want to emphasize that those two broad, what are called classes statistically, are not like completely exhaustive, that they cover maybe 5 out of 6 people. And then there's another, so it's like 85%. And then there's another 15% of people who are just like have their own stack, who like don't fit clearly into either of those. So as you're listening and you know somebody who's a SJ type, ISFJ, ISTJ, or maybe that's your type, keep in mind that they're probably 5 and 6 chance one of these two, but they might not be. They might be something that's a blend in between, or just like off doing their own thing. And that's just want to say that up front. And the other thing we've noticed is that of those two variations, one of them feels like it's more analytic, in the sense that it's a little bit more left brain and fits in well with like business and technology, tends to have more of a thinking flavor to it, regardless of the function we're talking about or the type. And then there's a holistic version that feels more like the arts, social service, people-oriented kind of stuff, more fluid, more maybe higher openness. And we generally maybe has more intuition, even if they're not an intuiting type. But let's see what they look like for these two. So for one of the ISFJs, but both of them have strong SI, and I'm going to talk about the analytic one first, because I usually do that. And right away, it actually has a strong thinking function as well, introverted thinking, and then extroverted feeling is coming after. So they're just going to have more of an analytical look to them from the very start. And they may be in a more analytical job like accounting, web services, anything technical that is actually coming up very quickly for them. And then weirdly, they also have pretty good extroverted thinking and introverted feeling as well. So at first sight, you're like, okay, they're an SJ, but are they ISFJ, ISTJ, ESFJ, maybe even ESTJ? They just specialize in being SJs. And then what really does not work well for them, that we're talking about thousands of people rating this way, is intuition. Extroverted, introverted, intuiting is just a big no, like rate very low. So they have this sort of broadly, I'm generally an SJ type. They have this tough feel. They're comfortable with procedures, data, business metrics. They probably have even a technical education. They could also be in something like nursing, which is people oriented, but still has a tremendous amount of technical stuff with it. We live in a very technical world. Organizations require that you have metrics. When we look at the definitions, like the questions that are TE questions, it involves objective methods, measurement, line of reasoning, tasks. How do you complete them in time and resource efficient ways? So all of that is focus in on this sort of analytic ISFJ. I think what we'll notice about them is that although they fit or found a way to fit in organizations and in the sort of the thinking world, and they have good analytical skills, what they're going to be lacking on is curiosity. Anything that is requiring like creativity, innovation. They have difficulty being adaptive. They can come off as rigid. They're like, well, we established this procedure for doing this, and why aren't you following this? Any change of course within a project or a family plan, whatever it is, can feel upsetting to them. And I would say it almost like following policies and procedures, even if it's really unpleasant for them personally. They're like, I don't like to do this. I've had to learn how to do this, and I'm doing it. So kudos to these ISFJs for really, really doing their best to adapt. But just keeping in mind that they are the least intuitive of all of the folks we're going to talk about today. That they really had to, in order to adapt in different ways, that's what came last, was essentially intuiting. And that's one version, and that's about 1/3 of ISFJs, and that's a lot. This is like a lot of ISFJs. And yet it makes sense. And probably when type descriptions were being written way back when, the first ones in 1940s and 50s, there was less technology. There was a less push on like technique and innovation and technicalities and precision. Or if it was precision, it was like, are you measuring in the syringe like the correct amount? Are you labeling the file? So it was much more hands-on, at least. And that's this analytic version of ISFJ. And then the more common 2/3 of ISFJs look more like the version that we're expecting to see. That has like introverted sensing with extroverted feeling. Beyond that, they mix in some other skills, sensing, thinking, intuiting. They're a little bit weak in the area of introspection. But overall, I would say they're leaning into their opposite type. If we had to make a broad statement, that they're leaning into NTP, so that they have that introverted thinking and extroverted intuiting, as well as some like other practical extroverted skills that sort of sit in the middle of their profile. Um, so they don't feel the cultural push quite as strong to role play extroverted thinking, because they're probably not in some big organization. I mean, they easily could be, but their job role is going to be people service. It's about coordinating between groups of people or individuals. They have this high extroverted feeling. Yeah, they have those like procedural organizational skills, but really the focus is on stuff like healthcare, education. So like standing up in front of people, talking to them, human resources, sitting down with people, making stuff work for them. They could also be in the arts, probably in a quite tangible way. And then their intuition is like, especially extroverted intuiting, which they have opportunities develop. So they're going to have more of a sense of humor. They're like open to like weird, quirky, haha kinds of things. And where there's the difficulty is still, I think with all the SJs, like self-care, and maybe their individual drive for success, and like, no more, I'm a member of the group and I'm helping out and I'm flexing in all these different ways, but working off of my strengths. So SIFE and is definitely solid. And then they just have some introverted thinking, extroverted intuiting, some extroverted thinking, extroverted sensing, also mixed in there, sort of in the middle. And that's like 2/3 of ISFJs. And they're probably the version that we're going to spot really easily. This is an ISFJ. And more like the standard fitting the ISFJ descriptions. And the analytic version is probably going to fly under the radar, and they may even know they're ISFJs, but other people will not see them that way. The analytic version will just look like SJ in general.
Yeah, the lack of focus on self-care sometimes, like when you feel that sense of needing to be responsible or take care of a situation, sometimes putting the responsibility above your body at times. But at the same time, SJs can also be very aware of, did you drink water? Did you do these things
Mhm.
to be comfortable and be healthy too? So, did you
Yeah.
relax?
Yeah. It's looking through the data, really something, a concept has jumped out to me, this idea of self-care. And it comes up in different ways. One of them is the literal self-care, which is like, am I getting enough water? Am I getting enough sleep? Like all of that. The other kind of self-care is, am I actually doing things in my life that meet my needs? Like not just the concrete needs, but the abstract needs. Or am I doing stuff for the group instead? So an example would be of an SJ. Let's say this is ISFJ, and she's married and has children and is working, is very busy. And there are also some wonderful projects she would love to do on the side, and she's probably harboring a desire to do those, whether it's some artistic or musical project, or whatever it is, just having like going exploring somewhere that she wants to for a vacation. And as an SJ type, she's like, I don't have the time or money to do that. That I have my kids' needs, I have my employers and clients' needs, I have my partner's needs, and they're constantly putting those first, including things like, are you getting enough water? Without asking really themselves, like, oh, I haven't had water in a while, but I don't have time for that. Because I have these other things to do first. And so that self-care in terms of meeting our type needs, I think that SJs often sacrifice, not that others can't too, but they often sacrifice their own individual needs and desires, which is why we might see introverted feeling items, remain in touch with what you want for yourself, remain true to what you want for yourself, evaluate what is worth believing in or most important to who you really are inside. That's like really hard for people to honestly say yes to. Not that they don't want to do it, but like they actually don't have time and energy to do it.
Time and energy is of the scarcity sometimes. So, hmm. Yeah, I like that, the different ways to look at the concept of self-care in that sense. So, before we make our way to ISTJ, Dario and I would like to talk about an event that is called Young for Life, and Dario will be leading, and I will be the special guest at. And so it's going to be held in New York in October and Chicago in November. And if you've ever wanted to study Jung's work experientially, I would recommend this because we will get to try out what Jung talks about as so valuable in his books, such as the mind body connection through yoga. You'll also get to try active imagination through shamanistic practices and learn how to get along well with others.
Mm.
And this is the whole package. Not to mention, you'll be able to spend quality time with me and Dario as we talk about whatever your mind would desire for those 3 days as we eat lunch together that Dario will treat us to. So if you like Carl Jung, if you like Myers-Briggs, if you like Dario and I, what better opportunity do you have? So
Yeah, yeah, wonderfully said. And in terms of some of the stuff, people may wonder, oh, why are you doing yoga? Like, what does yoga have to do with Jung? Well, Jung gave multiple talks on yoga. He went to India and met with the yogis. Many of the ideas from yoga about energy flow, for example, even beyond the talks that he gave, like suffuse his work afterward. So really, yoga is quite big piece, and it's also body-mind practice. It's sort of the more physical version of active imagination. Of course, we'll do active imagination, which was Jung's specific technique that he developed. Um, and we'll pair some of that with some shamanic breath work and drumming. He was very interested in shamanism around the world. When he came to America, he went to a Navajo reservation and worked with a Navajo shaman there. And learned a lot from that. Of course, we'll talk about type, and then some really wonderful practices like human connection. That's a really great way to take Jungian ideas like shadow and persona and complexes and actually bring them to the surface and make them real and experience them and talk about them. Besides like a collective unconscious and a personal unconscious, there's also a group unconscious, and we'll have a chance to work with that as well. And how do we bring that out and become aware of it? Which is all I'm going to say is it's going to be very lovely, rich 2.5 days. And you're going to go away with a lot of memories and useful practices, not just lecture theory kind of stuff, although there's time for that too.
yeah, so if you're curious, feel free to check out the links below. Now we're on to ISTJ. And so I'm curious about what is the analytic version of this personality type?
Yeah, so let's keep in mind when we're talking about these function stacks that that we can take a very rigid approach and say, oh, every type has exactly one stack, and maybe at a very deep level that's true. But the practical part, the reality is that we develop and learn to express ourselves within cultural context, our careers, our upbringing, all of that. And people have worked with type for a very long time, like Dr. Roger Pierman, when asked, like, what do you think is actually real about type, like actually substantive in the theory? And he's like, well, the only thing I know for sure is that everyone has a dominant function. And that really just goes back to Jung. And so, yeah, so in coming with this, it's we understand we're going to see variety. It's not like there's just like one alternate model that explains it. And we've discussed this in some of the other videos. So anyway, the analytic ISTJ, basically, they just specialize in being straight up sensing thinking types. They're good at introverted sensing, extroverted thinking. They've also developed skillful use of or reporting that introverted thinking and extroverted sensing. Now, again, when we talk about reporting skillful use, of course, it's self-report. Can we trust that? You know what? When like many thousands of people respond exactly the same way, then I think that that's telling us something. For this version of analytic ISTJ, they got that sensing thinking. Then they have intuition that sort of sits a little bit down, but in the middle. And then what they're really bad at is feeling. So most likely these individuals are going to be in hands-on technical field, something like accounting, or maybe even more abstract, computer programming, like app design and development, because they have to use some, like there's some creativity and intuition. And if you ask them, what is your problem solving process, or like what ongoing education are you doing, or what are some of your ideas sitting down in a brainstorming session, like they can contribute to those, but they do remain very sort of like factual, practical. This is what we know works. Like, here are the mental models we're using. Here are the external metrics. Here are the actions we can take or are taking. And that's front and center. And this is 1/3 of ISTJs. I think it fits the stereotype of the like, not like a totally stoic, but definitely like very practical, hands-on, traditional maybe ISTJ. And then they have these moments of intuition that pop up and maybe surprise us. And with ISFJ, we talked about self-care. This version also really neglects self-care. They have high loyalty, probably. They're not just focused on themselves, but they're neglecting their emotions and other people's emotions. And that's where the weak spot would be for analytic ISTJ.
Yeah, neglecting the introverted feeling, not really taking another person's emotions as seriously or their own. It's like, do
Hmm.
you need to emphasize it so much?
Yeah.
When it comes to the holistic version of ISTJ, I'm guessing their relationship with emotions is a little different, or I'm curious about how they differ from the analytic.
Yeah, they are. So the analytic ISTJ can look like an ISTP or ESTJ, because they just have that like very sensing thinking. But the holistic ISTJ, it starts off somewhat similar. What we call the tricycle model, which is very common. 40% plus of people across the board, 200,000 people, show this tricycle model, which is a dominant function plus an auxiliary in both of its attitudes. So SI with TE and TI together. So they're still pretty analytical. I mean, they're still thinking types. But then, surprise! They have extroverted intuiting, and extroverted feeling is like right coming up next is 4th and 5th, and then extroverted sensing is 6th. Um, so this flavor is pretty decent with people. They'd be like, "Hi, nice to meet you," and they come out and they shake your hand and they look you in the eye. They still have their strong organizational procedural skills, but they can do a presentation and they're going to tell some jokes, and they're going to be more expressive and exploratory. They're interested, curious, because this is what NE brings. It brings enthusiasm. They're interested in what's like the perspective, potential in something. They have a warmth, their energy in interacting with other people. They're aware of the needs of other people. Again, learned. But these are skills that they've had to develop, and most likely then they can go into a management position. They're not just like a tech worker. I don't want to say just a tech worker. Some of the most important people in organizations are the tech workers. You can get rid of the managers or swap them out. Like the key tech person, you can't get rid of, or the whole thing collapses. But yeah, they're probably going to be in management. They could be easily in social service, possibly even the arts, although they'll take a more technical approach to it. Any role that requires the practical stuff, maybe as part of a big organization, but also idea generation, interaction with people. And actually, something I didn't even mention is sports. That could be an area as well, which requires the kind of sport that's with teamwork and with other people and the physical activity. And there's like a charisma that comes with them, because this is something we found shows up in the extroverted sensing questions. Is extroverted sensing has this aura of charisma that comes with it. So really, this is 2/3 of ISTJs. Their core is what we expect for ISTJ. They have pretty good sixth function, TI. And then everything else is really like having a variety of things available to them to really just break out of the different stereotypes. So as manager, as coach, maybe even as therapist. Oh, the extroverted feeling, let's pay attention to what this person needs. School principal, could even in theory be an entertainment. So really there's more variety and flexibility. And then the difficulty though is again, as I mentioned, with that, a little bit of the self-care and like asking, but what do you want? And what is your vision for yourself? Or just this idea of like, yeah, I'm gonna, as with like say INTJ or INFJ, where they have this very intuitive way of managing themselves. That's not these folks here. So they're holistic, but you can't be good at everything everywhere. They just have this wonderful like extroverted intuiting enthusiasm and this like aura of care for other people.
This ISTJ seems more empathic in a way and personable, with the extroverted feeling being okay.
Hmm.
It seems like for the TJ types, there's always a version of the TJs that's a little bit more extroverted feeling seeming, at least on in terms of skillful usage.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the FE questions are like, do you feel inclined to be responsible for and take care of others' feelings? Do you take on maybe someone else's needs as your own? Do you help make people feel comfortable by doing hosting and caretaking? Like SJ folks and even TJ folks in general, like NTJs, may find, oh yeah, I need to do those things, because those are also part of like all of our relationships. And I think a word that you used like in another talk is like role play is a really good word to use. Like we're very aware as TJ types that we're doing some role playing extroverted feeling, and that isn't our natural selves. And when under stress, TJ types revert to, is this efficient? Is this effective? Are you wasting my time? Uh, do you have contingency plans worked out? Like, what is your reasoning from A to B? Where is the evidence for that? Like, it's still going to come back to that under stress.
I can see that. Yeah, you'll return back to your default under stress.
Yes.
Yeah. So what were the types that this holistic ISTJ can be confused for?
So the holistic version, I mean, it'd say a little bit, they're leaning almost into like NTP. And so there is this element of, I'm not going to say they're INTP-ish, but they can sit in a room with INTPs and like slide pretty well with those. They could be mistaken for like ISFJ or I think probably ISFJ. So it would be just like there's a version of ISFJ, the analytic, that can look like ISTJ. The holistic ISTJ can look sort of ISFJ like. And there is that that playfulness that they might even score as an intuiting type, because often we take our dominant function, so take it for granted. It's like, oh, of course, like doesn't everyone do that? And then they
Mm.
would score as NT types, either NTJ or yeah, they're a version that could like score or self-select as INTJ before they actually spend time to self-reflect on it. I think for NTJs, because they'll probably figure out pretty quick that's not exactly them. But the way that many of these type assessments are structured, with these like, are you more E or I? Are you more S or N? T or F, J or P? Like, those kinds of assessments are not specifying what kind of intuiting or what kind of feeling. So they're going to be like, yeah, I do intuiting, meaning they're ISTJs who do some extroverted intuiting. And then they're going to score on, like, Myers-Briggs as INTJ. And when you have to dig into it, you're like, and they read a description, they realize, oh, okay, actually, I don't do like this introverted intuiting thing. So I think there's always one version for every one of the types. It's really important to like take them through a debrief process. Please do not rely upon just like, oh, I took one type assessment and it told me I was this type and therefore I must be that type. Like, that's dangerous and sort of unethical.
Yeah, don't trust the test to know your type and things. It's an initial guide, and then you research from there on, so
Hmm.
yeah.
Yeah,
Alright.
and I've worked with what I would with a holistic ISTJ. I mean, for a couple of years, was sitting right next to me, and we worked on a project together. In addition to some other people on the team, and I thought he was a great example. He comes up very flexible, very interested in different things. Is talking about like cryptocurrency, and was like one of the first in the company to pick up using AI. More expressive. He did like to eat lunch by himself, not with everybody else. But he was like friendly and caring, and he had a family and 3 kids who like asked far more of him um, than I think. I mean, this happens, but the kids, especially because I think a couple of them were like ESTP and ESFP. God bless them. He was like, all the time there's like issues and problems, and kicked out of school, and go to the like emergency room, and there was no time for himself for self-care. And I see this through all of the ISTJs and ISFJs, is this time for me and what I want, and pursuing that, and like making more of myself in the pursuit of that. Like, that's really what gets neglected.
Mm. Yeah, so ISTJs can be into, um, current things like AI and cryptocurrency, and even be learning about it proactively as well too, and it's a part of the cultural trend of society to do that too. And so,
Mhm.
as we talked about in the ESTJ video, ISTJs in the traditional profiles, the description is not always that accurate, because it says that they're a little bit more traditional, or they're a little bit more resistant to change, which they are, but the profile itself makes them sound like they they focus only on the past, but it's in today's culture to be innovative. So ISTJs will also jump on that as well too,
Mhm.
because they're practical types, and so the practical thing is to learn about AI right now. The
Yeah.
practical thing is to learn about crypto. So
Mhm, mhm. And that's it, and it's, funny, type has been around long enough, that especially with the Myers-Briggs materials, like Gifts Differing is a great book, and Please Understand Me as well, by Isabel Myers and David Kiersey, respectively. But they are a little bit dated. They're very mid-20th century, and they do tend to miss. I mean, I remember a world where there were no personal computers and we went outside to play, much less like smartphones or anything like that. Like, those simply didn't exist. And the type descriptions were written with that in mind. And now we live in a very technological world where many of the things we're interacting with are virtual rather than tangible, hands-on. Um, and SJs and just sensing types in general have adjusted to that. I think we become more and more living in like an NT kind of world, culturally speaking. And so the cultural norms have shifted. So I would say to anybody who's looking, there are times when maybe there are sensing folks who score as intuiting, especially on something like an either or you just sensing or intuiting. And they actually score as intuiting types, but they're sensing types. And the same, I would say, for people in organizations may easily score as thinking. And they're actually feeling types that have just learned to adapt to the thinking environment. like
Mhm.
metrics and procedures that you have to follow, and the bottom line effectiveness. And the person is really, I mean, I've met an ISFJ working in this kind of in technology in like a startup organizational setting. And she was actually very aware that she was ISFJ, which was really cool. But her behavior externally was a lot like an ESTJ, and just like having to flip it around completely and be really like tough and analytical and like what are the procedures and this and that. But we know with role play that when the stress comes, the person gets brittle, and that brittleness of what doesn't actually work for them, like deeply internally, doesn't meet their needs, and is just sort of like skills that are developed, but there's a limitation to those skills. Whereas NTs under pressure will do all of the NT things to the exclusion of what they need to do, maybe. And that's, when push comes to shove, like, what does it look like for people?
Mhm. Yeah, when people are acting as something or role playing as something, the facade is more easily crumbled under stress, and so that's a way of figuring out what your natural preferences are, because you actually do like to do them and they energize you, and they're your default during times of stress.
Hmm.
So it's what your fallback.
Hmm. Yeah, I believe that there's both like an initial response to more stress, and then there's a recharge response, which is actually different than the type preferences. So for me, I know when I'm under stress, I sort of revert to very much like the IJ kind of stress response and extroverted thinking, and just sort of like the usual NTJ, like that's just like a really stupid idea. Like, shut up. Like, you don't even have any data for that. Like, give an example. Like, under stress, like, I'm just hopefully not going to say that out loud, but that's what I'm thinking. But what actually recharges me is still my opposite type stuff. To go swimming or do exercise or meditation, or I'm not like a big drinker in terms of alcohol, but sometimes a glass of wine is like really nice. um, and those flip behaviors is a way to recharge. I think it's important to be aware of that too, and then eventually maybe we can incorporate some recharge behaviors into our daily life, and even into our career activities.
Yeah. And so, thank you so much, Dario, for sharing about the variations of SI users, the ISTJ and the ISFJ, and giving a more nuanced profile of both of these types, and to be more organic with how we view the function stack, that people are not like these robotic, like these rigid models for how we act. We're not equations. It's a little bit more organic than that.
Yes. Yeah.
So,
And in all the irony, I know that like ISTJ and ISFJ are two types that would definitely want to think, how there's one exact theory of type that I learn and that I master and that I can use. And it may be that actually it's messier than that. And your own types are great examples of social pressure, cultural upbringing, career, all of that coming together up against type preferences and finding out like how they mesh together.
yeah, well said. All right. And so thank you so much, Dario, for coming out and sharing that wisdom on the organic nature of human beings. And we'll see you all in the next video. Bye.
Yes. Thank you.